Final Fantasy XVI has been out for almost 2 months now, and I know I'm a little bit late to the party here as far as getting a review out, but I just beat the game this week, and I would love to tell you guys all of my fresh thoughts, my honest opinions on Final Fantasy XVI. I'm really excited to talk to you about it, so without further ado, let's talk about Final Fantasy XVI. So if you're new here to the channel, or maybe you've been here for a little while, I have been doing kind of a retrospective series of not just the Final Fantasy games themselves, but I'm planning on going through just kind of a whole Square RPG retrospective series from the beginning, starting with Final Fantasy I. You can go ahead and click up here to start watching those videos. This review of Final Fantasy XVI, I'm not necessarily considering a part of that retrospective review series. This is a brand new game that just came out. It's not really, I can't really do a whole retrospective on it. I still need to digest what I just experienced, but I am planning, once we get further down the line, once I've gone through pretty much all of the Final Fantasy games up till now in a retrospective kind of style of review, I'm going to revisit Final Fantasy XVI just to see if maybe my opinions change in the future, but I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way before we start the review proper. Also, if you've seen my reviews before, you'll know that I kind of like to do this thing where I talk about the good aspects of the game, and then I talk about the mixed aspects, the things that I thought were just kind of so-so, and then the bad aspects of the game. And I just don't really know how I'm going to structure this review, because I don't necessarily think that it's just as easy as that, as just saying, here's what was good, here's what I thought was mixed, here's what I thought was bad. Because there's just so much about this game, and there's so much reputation that this game has. There's like just legacy-wise, just talking about the history of Final Fantasy, talking about action games as a whole. There is so much packed here into this game that can be dissected bit by bit, and honestly, it's a little bit intimidating even coming at a review like this, so I just want to also get that out of the way. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, I actually finished the game a few days ago, and I planned on starting this review a few days ago, but there's a piece of me that feels like I have so much to say about the game, and another piece of me that maybe feels like I don't know what to say about this game. It kind of left me speechless. The whole time that I played through the game, I was impressed by so much. I was disappointed by a few things also. Overall, I think I just at least want to start this review off by saying that I loved this game. I loved playing it. All of the negative stuff that we'll get into here in just a little bit put aside, I think that this was a worthwhile experience, and it's one of the first video games that I've played in a really long time that kind of mentally put me back into the seat of my 12-year-old self, my 13-year-old self, playing a PlayStation 2 game like, Kingdom Hearts 2 or Metal Gear Solid 3, where I just spent so much time over the course of a good portion of my summer back then, just playing through these games and coming back to it and just digesting it bit by bit by bit, piece by piece, going through this game, feeling like it's never ending. And I mean that in really the best sense that I possibly can. I felt like I've put so much time into this game, and I don't really regret any of it. Like I said, I played this game so much, it actually took me 79, probably about 80 hours to finish the game from start to finish, and I went through every single side quest that popped up. I read every single bit of lore that Harpocrates was able to give me. I just explored everything. I went ahead and tried to open up every single treasure chest in the game. I crafted all of the weapons and items and gear and stuff like that that I can be using in the game. I really tried to make my very first experience of this game, I just tried to make the most out of it, if that makes sense. I just tried to do everything that I could without feeling like I was just forcing myself to be a completionist on my first run through. And that's just another reason too why there hasn't been any proper reviews or ranking lists and things like that since this game has come out. It's really been my main priority. It's just playing through this game, and it's been one of my most anticipated games for years now. And I'm just so glad to have finally finished it. And oh my gosh, there's just so much to talk about with this game. I'm gonna do everything that I can to make sure that I'm not rambling. I don't really script out my videos all that much. If I'm doing a retrospective, I try to put out notes about the history of a game and, you know, just try to make sure that I can have names out in front of me so that I'm not just mispronouncing all of these Japanese names. And so usually I just put up bullet points or something like that. I don't even really have that here. I just have these raw feelings and emotions about this game. But enough just squabbling about what this review is. Let's talk about the story of this game. Just my gut feeling, as soon as I finished the game, the credits rolled, epilogue played out and everything, I think I can absolutely confidently say that this is my favorite story out of any Final Fantasy video game. I don't know if it's my favorite story out of any video game I've ever played, but from what Final Fantasy has brought to the table in the past, its narrative, its characters, its world, etc., Final Fantasy XVI excels the most, in my opinion, at its world, at its story, at its characters. And for me, personally, this is the definitive nature of a Final Fantasy game. I know that there's so much debate. I know I'm probably gonna get comments that, and I encourage you to comment down below what you truly believe Final Fantasy to be. But for me personally, I come to these games every single time for its story, for its characters, for its world. And Final Fantasy XVI delivers on that promise of a good Final Fantasy story, in my opinion. Throughout the game, I'm an emotional person. Maybe you guys have caught that from some of my previous reviews, but there were multiple times where I was tearing up. Even just the ending of the game, there was a specific scene, I was just talking to my buddy Colin about this morning, that as soon as it happened, I just bust out into like ugly crying alone right here playing the video game. And I love that the game made me do that. And I think that it goes kind of hand in hand with that feeling that I was telling y'all about going back to that summer of my adolescence and just spending so much time with the game. That's how I felt here with these characters in this world. There was so much care put into the game about making you feel like you know the cast around you. And every time that you finished out a side quest that had all of this world building, or every time you just completed another main story quest, you truly just feel just the direction that the world is going, and you feel like you're in it. You feel like you're a part of this grand mission that your main character is on, and I love it. But speaking of the characters too, let's just talk about our main protagonist here, Clive. I love Clive. I mean, he's one of these characters that you kind of look at him from the outside, maybe you started the game, and he just kind of seems like a generic high fantasy character. But this guy has so much depth. He's gone through so much hurt. So much stuff has happened to him. Without getting too much into spoilers, there is a part in the story where Clive realizes a lot of things about himself. And maybe this is not just the character writing itself, but the voice acting also. We'll talk about that later. The performance here, you just really get a sense that this is a well-rounded, well-developed character with very true emotions and very true motives and morals, you know. And it's just like, I don't know, like this game really has done the best, in my opinion, at making these video game characters feel like very, very believable characters. Very early on in the game, you're also introduced to Sid, who is your partner, your kind of mentor, since, you know, all of the stuff in your past has kind of like been left behind you. Now you're moving forward and you've got this guy Sid who you're working with, and you go to his hideout and everything. And this guy really is almost just as primary of a character as Clive is. There's probably going to be multiple times just throughout this video where all I'll do is just praise the voice acting here, but the performance of Sidolphus Telamon is perfect. This is the prime example of just voice acting in a video game. It was superb. And I know the game has only been out for just a little under 2 months now, and I don't really consider this a huge spoiler. Now that I've finished the game and I've seen what the trailers have kind of pushed to the forefront of as far as what they want players to expect in going through this game, a lot of the portion of this game is made up of Clive going out to destroy these huge mother crystals. There's a handful of them spread out throughout all of Valesthia, and your main goal, as you come to sort of realize, is to go out and destroy these crystals. And these are huge behemoth mountains, right? These are giant crystals. As far as just hearing what your goal is supposed to be, you just get giddy, you get excited, like, what does that mean? How is that supposed to happen? What do you mean, destroy these huge mountains? Like, this is crazy. Every single time that you go out and you do one of those missions where you're going out to destroy one of the mother crystals, you kind of start to realize the formula that is at hand. You're going out into the dungeon, essentially, that is making your way to the crystal. You have a handful of enemies come at you, you have some boss fights, you've got tons of cutscenes, you typically do a big icon battle, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit. Essentially, that's just kind of the formula. And then the mother crystal is destroyed, and then you're planning on going to the next one. Even though it's a little bit formulaic every single time you do it, it kind of follows a simple pattern. The execution of doing each one of these crystal destroying missions, it's very different. It's like the scenario, the situation that you're put in is very different. And because so much of this game is just focused on presenting this story to you, it feels really good every single time. I loved the mission that we were on. I loved playing through all of it. I loved doing all of the icon battles and stuff. And since we're already here now, let's go ahead and just talk about the gameplay for a second. Final Fantasy XVI is an action RPG. And what I mean by that, and as you've probably seen for yourself, whether it be from just playing the game or hearing everybody talk about it, this is not a turn-based RPG. Pretty much every Final Fantasy game from 1 through 13, in a sense, is turn-based. And I get, maybe you can even say 14 is turn-based to an extent as well. But 15, it's an open world game, action combat. 16, it's more linear. It's got more hallways than 15 does. It's got less open spaces, but it does have very big open spaces, and the combat in the game is not turn-based. You play as Clive, and you can kind of control your dog companion, Torgal, in a similar way that you would control Atreus in the God of War games. You have some quick button commands that tell Torgal to do really only like 2 or 3 things, and that's heal you or attack. And the attack is kind of, you have one type of attack and another kind. So really it's only 2 kinds of commands for Torgal. And I will just say, Torgal doesn't necessarily feel like a party member in the game, if that makes sense. Like, you do control Torgal. Torgal is with you pretty much throughout the entirety of the video game. But this is really a single player game. This is a single player, action focused character video game, and that character is Clive. And so you are controlling Clive, you're exploring the world as Clive, you're attacking and using abilities and items and stuff as Clive. This is arguably the greatest departure. By greatest, I mean the biggest departure from the Final Fantasy series. And just in mentioning comparisons here, I also would say that I went throughout this entire game pretty much telling myself to disconnect it, right? Every Final Fantasy game is different in one way or another. They're all kind of a different experience while holding very similar things about themselves, maybe thematically, gameplay-wise, story-wise. They're all a Final Fantasy game, but I really tried going into 16 knowing that it was just very different, especially in the gameplay department and in the level design. But I found it also really hard to do that because so much about Final Fantasy XVI thematically is incredibly Final Fantasy. There is so much about this game that is a love letter to just about everything before it. Almost, you get to the end of this game and it almost feels like this could be the last Final Fantasy game. It's definitely not. It certainly is not the last mainline numbered Final Fantasy game. We will almost certainly absolutely get a Final Fantasy 17, but so much of this game is just thematically Final Fantasy. Like I said, pretty much everything other than the gameplay itself, it being an action-focused game where you're not controlling a party of characters, that is really the biggest differentiator between this game and the rest of the series. One thing that this game does really drastically different over every other game is its removal of strategy. Not that you can't do things strategically and think smart about going into battles, but it kind of pulls away from strategy in exchange for style. And that's another thing that this game does very well, is its style. This game is flashy as hell. There's one thing I never got tired of, it was just looking at the game, especially whenever you get into combat and you're cycling through all of these iconic abilities, which we'll talk more about here in a second. It is just a treat to look at. I'm still flabbergasted that my PS5 was just putting out all of these visuals without much of any slowdown on me. And like I said, you do get these iconic abilities, and what I mean by that is Clive, the main character, as he progresses through the story, as he fights giant icon summon monsters. When you're finished with those battles, by the end of it, you obtain some of those summons, some of those icons' abilities, and you can add them into your repertoire of action ability commands. You've got Ifrit, Phoenix, Shiva, Titan, Ramu, Bahamut, and Odin, and through all of those icons in the game, you get to kind of swap in and out abilities that reflect those icons in the game. And like I said, it's super flashy. A lot of them do big screen enemy damage. Some of them are more focused on fighting bosses or just one enemy at a time. There's a lot of variety that you can do in this game when it comes to just swapping through your abilities, how you want to go about certain zones, certain bosses, and things like that. I love doing all of that stuff. There's also equipment in the game where they will allow you to, for instance, just raise your attack level, raise your defense, or your health points in the game. There are also items that increase the amount of time it takes for one of your icon abilities to recharge, or the amount of damage that one specific ability might do, things like that. There are also these other rings in the game that are designed for accessibility purposes. I know that there's going to be a lot of people who this will be either their first Final Fantasy game, maybe even one of the first games that they ever play, so they really go above and beyond into making sure that many people can play this game exactly how they might want to play it when it comes to things like difficulty and things of that nature. You have things like the Ring of Timely Focus, which kind of gives you this window of time, this slowdown animation where it tells you, hey, you're about to get hit by an enemy, you know, you can either block or dodge, and it just helps you out in that sense so that you can, you know, do better counterattacks. It helps you practice for if you ever want to take it off. You just kind of know where enemy hitboxes are and things like that. If you're going to be hit at a certain time, it's good practice. It's also something that you can just keep on for the entire game. If you just kind of want that smoother, you know, I don't want to take too much damage. I would like to just kind of walk through the game, and some of these kind of lend themselves into making the game, I think, a little bit too easy, in my opinion. Not that they're required to be used by any means. For instance, there's also another ring that, this is probably the only ring in the game that I can think of that I used, and it was the Ring of Timely Assistance. I think that's what it's called. It essentially controls Torgal for you. Torgal just works on his own AI, and you don't have to tell Torgal to do anything, to heal you, or to, you know, attack. That's the only thing that I used, mainly because, like I said, Torgal doesn't really feel like a main party member. Whenever you're just pressing the up button for Torgal to attack, or the right button for Torgal to heal you, the amount that Torgal heals you is so little. I'd never really used that, and the amount that Torgal deals in damage also isn't a ton, especially whenever all of my abilities just did so much damage to these enemies. So I had Torgal just kind of on auto mode because I didn't necessarily feel like I wanted to care about managing his abilities and things like that. So that's really the only ring that I used. But there are other rings as well. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but another one that just automatically uses a potion if your health gets too low. It's just things like that that is designed to make the game more accessible for players who just are struggling in certain areas, or they just want to go through the game a specific way. And like I said too, these are big zones we're going through. This isn't an open world game in the sense that like Final Fantasy 15 is an open world, but it's got these big areas that are kind of like, pretty much every area in the game is very similar to the big, I'm blanking on the name of it. Is it the Veldt? Or is that Final Fantasy VI? The big open area that you get to in Final Fantasy 13, where you have all of these missions that pop up around you, all of these items that you can find, and all these enemies that you can battle. There are essentially 4 huge zones in the game that are all structured similarly to that. I personally liked the zones. I wasn't necessarily hoping that it was more linear, and I wasn't hoping that it was more open world. And even though, like I said in the beginning, I did a lot of exploring, there kind of isn't much of a reason to explore. A lot of the items that you'll find out into the field, or treasure chests that you find, you'll find some treasure chests that have things like powerful weapons, collectible things like music tracks in the game, money, and other useful items that you can find. But there really wasn't much of a moment in the game where I opened up a treasure chest that was super well hidden and it just had something that like blew my mind. There really wasn't anything about the game that incentivized me just going out and exploring, other than maybe just the visuals and the presentation of the world. Like I said, I still did the exploring, but if I'm looking at it at an objective, I guess, look at the game, there's really not a whole lot of reason to explore unless you are someone like me who just wants to see everything that this game has. And everything that the game has is very pretty to look at. So if that's you, sure, explore to your heart's content. But otherwise, there's not much of an incentive to really go off the beaten path. You have these hunts that you do in the game where you have the one Moogle that you interact with in the game. I'm blanking on the Moogle's name, but I like his design. I thought that it was a pretty solid execution of including a Moogle in a very realistic high fantasy type setting like this. I thought that it was fine. I don't really have any issues with the Moogle. I liked it. But he's kind of your hunt master. He tells you about the hunts. You can go up to him and look at the board, and it's kind of Final Fantasy 12 like in that sense, where you have this hunt board and you have these little descriptions that tell you where to find this, you know, legendary enemy or something like that. And whenever you're done, you get ability points, obviously, you get that experience, you get some money, and then you also get special items and things like that. There were a few really challenging bosses here in my opinion, and some that I had to come back to way later on once I leveled up, once I was like level 47 or 50 or something like that, just so that I could go back to those bosses that I could not take on whenever I was like level 30. I liked the inclusion of the hunt board, and you know, I welcome a hunt board. But through those items as well, you can do things like craft new armor and weapons through the blacksmith. And one negative thing that I do have to say about this game, especially just whenever you're talking about an action RPG like this and you have the option to craft new materials like weapons and armor and things like that, the game doesn't really take too much care in really fleshing out a crafting system. There really wasn't ever a single part in the game where I wanted to craft something and I didn't have all of the, you know, required materials for it. Maybe closer to the end of the game, you know, it's like, in order to do this, you need to go kill that hunt. But I was already on a mission to kill all of the hunt enemies. So by the time that I was done killing all of the hunt enemies, I was able to go out and get the most powerful weapon in the game and things like that, and get really strong armor and all of that good stuff. So it just didn't necessarily feel like there was this challenge to go out and find these materials. And I think that kind of coincides with this idea that there's really not a ton to just explore in this game. Like I said, it has these big open areas and lots of enemies that you can fight, but I never really found myself in a position where I felt like I needed to grind, really. Besides like what I said with coming back to enemies later on that were way higher leveled than me, but that was just through a process of just going throughout the game normally. I never grinded throughout the game to take on hard bosses or to take on hard enemies and things like that, but that doesn't mean I didn't die a handful of times, and I'm glad that I did. I've heard lots of people say that they never died even a single time in this game, and I'm kind of happy that I did, because I personally just felt that challenge that many other people didn't feel. Like I said, the only assisting ring that I kept on my character was just that ring of timely assistance where Torgal just went out and attacked enemies for me and gave me a little bit of HP if I needed it. So that's really the only thing that was helping me out. Other than that, there were some challenging moments. I just didn't necessarily feel like I needed to grind in order to beat hard enemies. I just needed to get better, and maybe this is the part of the game where the strategy was, you know, affecting the gameplay a little bit, and I just needed to perfect my strategy a little bit more. And overall, though, I think I will say that the gameplay that's here, the actual just combat going in with all of your abilities and the items that you can carry on you, just potions and high potions and maybe some strength tonics and elixirs every now and then, going in and just fighting and doing the combat is fun. I think it's, like I said, really flashy. It's cool to just use these very satisfying commands. I think that the DualSense controller, you know, just since we're just talking about a PS5 game here, that's another aspect that I liked about it. I personally felt like it used the DualSense in a pretty solid way. Some of it was a bit more gimmicky, like they just wanted to make you feel like the DualSense was worth it by making you hold down a trigger to open up a door, and there's like some tension on the trigger a little bit, and Clive is just pushing really hard on it. That's really about it as far as like doing things like super zany with the controller. But just in general, I just liked holding the controller and doing the combat. I felt like it just felt really good. The only thing that I can, I guess, just say about it, though, is because there's so much story in the game, and because I didn't necessarily feel like I needed to grind like I was talking about, I just think that maybe there could have been more incentive to actually do combat. I felt like maybe I didn't do combat enough in the game. Like I said, I liked doing the combat. I just wish that I had more reason to do more of it. And I'll talk about sound real fast as well, because if you've watched my videos, you'll know that a big thing, besides just the story and just the presentation of a game like this, the biggest thing for me after that is the music. And the music here is really, really good. I was actually just talking to my buddy about this morning about the game. I like the music a lot. I think I'm blanking on his name. He does the music, or she, I don't even really know. They do the music for Final Fantasy 14, and I know 14 has nothing but praise for like every single track in that game, and realistically, I don't have a single negative thing to say about any of the tracks here in Final Fantasy 16. Some of them were pretty memorable, some of them weren't so memorable, but everything still sounded beautiful. Everything was very clearly well composed and well orchestrated. It sounded wonderful. Really, the only gripe that I guess I would say I have with the music in the game is just, it feels like they put a lot of emphasis on rearranging and reorchestrating a lot of very familiar Final Fantasy songs. Good Final Fantasy songs, really good arrangements, and I think that the original stuff that they had here, like I said, sounded really good. There just wasn't enough originality in its soundtrack. A lot of the songs that really stood out to me were songs where it's like, wait, that's the overworld theme to Final Fantasy 1. Wait, that's just, they're going back and doing, you know, this song from this game, you know? It's stuff like that. And even though it sounds really good and I love it, I wouldn't change those. I just wish that maybe there was some more originality in its music as far as just, you know, writing some new pieces that are earworms. But overall, the music here is wonderful. Other than just, I wish that there was more original music. That's really all I have to say about that. Kind of like with Breath of the Wild. I love all of the music in Breath of the Wild and in Tears of the Kingdom. I just wish there was more of it. That's really my only complaint here. And like I talked about earlier with voice acting, the sound design here from the, you know, just everyone who's a part of the sound team here, whether it's the voice actors or the people just doing sound effects and things like that, this game sounds wonderful. I loved listening to this game. Music, voice acting, sound effects, it all just came together so well, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It just continues to just immerse the player into its story, into its gameplay. It just does that job perfectly. So I guess I'll also kind of start closing by talking about something that I was talking about earlier, and that's just how this game is thematically so Final Fantasy. And of course, things like the lack of party members and, you know, turn-based strategy, those are the clear things that the game is missing, but it makes up for it almost in all of these other ways that are so clearly Final Fantasy inspired. I kept thinking to myself, like, well, would I really actually love this game if it wasn't a Final Fantasy game? If this was a new IP and it changed the name and it removed the chocobos and stuff like that, like, would I still enjoy this game? And honestly, I personally just can't imagine this game being not Final Fantasy, because there's so much about it that is intrinsically Final Fantasy. Even if it's little stuff that kind of aggravated me. Like, not aggravated like it made me mad per se, but just like little disappointments here and there. For instance, Phoenix Downs, right? Phoenix Downs are in every game. We know what they do. You use them. If somebody falls in battle, you can use a Phoenix Down to revive them. The people who come and join your party, Torgal, none of these other outside characters die or pass out or faint or whatever you want to call it. They don't ever do that, so you never use a Phoenix Down on them. And whenever Clive dies, that's a game over. There's no using a Phoenix Down on yourself. So how do they use a Phoenix Down? It's an item that is a part of its story. And it's a little disappointing because it's like, well, it's a Phoenix Down. It's pretty freaking iconic in the Final Fantasy series, but you're just kind of making it a prop for the story. And in that situation, it was a little disappointing. And I don't mean to just use the word prop as like a strictly negative thing, but it's just another piece of the story. They go ahead and they use the Phoenix Down. Instead of putting it in the gameplay department, they put it in the narrative, the story department of the game. And even though it's disappointing that we don't have Phoenix Downs to use, I still appreciate that they still used Phoenix Down in the game. Another disappointing thing about the game is just its lack of airship. This is clearly a Final Fantasy staple, the airship. You have the airship. It's Final Fantasy, you fly an airship. Admittedly, this is a very disappointing thing, but we get things like side quests that mention airships. Actually, you're technically on an airship for like the entire game. I mean, whenever you're at the hideaway, I don't want to get into too many spoilers, like, airships have been a thing. They're a part of the story. You just don't fly one like how you would in a traditional Final Fantasy game. And that's really what I mean here by there is so much thematically appropriate Final Fantasy things. I know for many, just the fact that it's not, okay, well, why didn't you include those things in the gameplay? I know that that might be a big turnoff for a lot of people, but there is just so much here that whenever you just take a look back at its story and things like that, I feel like somewhere down the line in the future, I think we're going to look at Final Fantasy XVI and appreciate it for how much it appreciates Final Fantasy as an entity. I've never played Final Fantasy because it's turn-based. I never played it for its gameplay. I play it for the story, like I said. And yes, I like turn-based, but I also like action RPGs. I like games like Kingdom Hearts. I loved the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I like Devil May Cry. I've played a little bit of Dragon's Dogma as well, and I really like the action stuff that you got going on there. I like the Souls games. I like action combat. And the fact that we got a Final Fantasy game that is action combat, for me personally, like I said, this is just my review here. For me personally, this was a plus for me. Taking away all of the negatives that I have about not including other little bits of gameplay that are reminiscent of previous Final Fantasy's gameplay, I like the fact that it's an action RPG. And other than just like the little tiny gripes that I have throughout most of it, I just like this game a lot. And I have not played Final Fantasy mode. This is the mode that you get to unlock once you've finished the story. It's basically a new game plus. You start the game over. There's a higher level cap. In the base game, the level cap is 50, and I think the level cap is 100 whenever you do Final Fantasy mode. You have harder enemies out the gate, so there's a bit more of a challenge there. You know, I know for a lot of people, that's kind of the mode that they wish they had in the beginning, because I've heard from a lot of people that the game is just a little too easy. I'm excited to play the Final Fantasy mode, but I think it's going to be a little while before I do. I'm really glad with my singular experience that I just had with Final Fantasy XVI, and I think it's going to be a little while before I revisit it. I liked the open, ambiguous ending without getting into spoilers and stuff like that, so I don't really feel a need right now to just go back and relive everything. It was a 79-hour experience for me, 80 hours, whatever, so of course I can skip cutscenes, but I think I would want to go back and revisit this game once I've kind of been caught up with my Final Fantasy retrospective series, if that makes sense, just so that I can get another feel for how previous games have maybe been just leading up to this, and maybe I'll get back to Final Fantasy XVI and I'll have negative thoughts about it, or I'll have even more positive thoughts than I have right now. I'm excited to get back to it, but I'm also not in any rush. I'm gonna go and play Final Fantasy III as my next Final Fantasy game here. And I'm excited just to see what sort of inspirations that Final Fantasy XVI took from Final Fantasy III. You know, that's really another thing I'm really excited for, is just going back through this series and just remembering how much Final Fantasy XVI just paid homage to these other games. Also, as I was playing the game, once I got to about 25 to 30 hours in, that's whenever they rolled out the patches to kind of help performance and visual fidelity and things like that. I personally just always played in the graphics mode. I know for action RPGs like this, many people are going to want to play it in 60 frames per second. I really did. I wanted to play that, and I did for a little bit, but because the cutscenes are at a much lower frame rate and they'll dip if you do that performance mode, I just played it kind of safe and just stuck with the fidelity mode, the graphics mode, because it keeps it all at a lower frame rate, but there's less dips, and that's, for me personally, I just liked having the more consistent experience over gameplay and story overall. But guys, I know this might be a long one. I'm just kind of rambling here because I just loved talking about this game. But go ahead down below, let me know what you thought about Final Fantasy XVI. Have you even played it? Are you gonna play it? I don't know. Like, let me know everything, all of your thoughts, all of your opinions about Final Fantasy XVI. And while you're down there, go ahead and click the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell as well, so that you are notified every single time that a new video like this comes out. Also down below, there is a link to join the Discord if you want to hop in there and talk more Final Fantasy or whatever, any RPGs. That's kind of our thing as we talk about RPGs, but pretty soon here I'm also going to be playing Layers of Fear, the new 2023 remake / sequel of the first two Layers of Fear games, and I've also got another game copy that I'm probably going to review here before I start Final Fantasy III, so I'm excited to start those. I'm excited to talk about more video games with you guys. Like I said, I'm sorry that it's been a little while since I've been able to make a proper review or a video like this. You know, I've just been playing so much Final Fantasy XVI, so I'm happy that it's done. I'm excited to get back to it whenever I get to it in the future, but I'm really more excited to just play more video games now that I'm done with 16. So with all that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.